This is the fourth and final sermon in our series on the subject of marriage. And if you didn't catch the first three sermons, then you need to go online and make sure that you watch them, because those three sermons laid the foundation for what I'm going to be teaching on this morning. In other words, each sermon builds on the previous sermons. So make sure you go back and watch those three sermons. Now this morning, what I want to talk about is the purpose and importance of setting personal boundaries within a marriage. But first, let me explain what I mean by boundaries. Because normally when we think of boundaries, we think of property or land. We think of some type of boundary line that marks where one piece of property ends and another piece of property begins. And yes, that is a boundary. But boundaries aren't just limited to property or to land. In fact, boundaries can be set for just about anything. If you're playing a game, you can set boundaries. A football field is 100 yards long and 53 1/3 yards wide, with an end zone that's 10 yards deep on each end of the football field. And you play the game within those boundaries. If you step out of bounds, the play immediately ends. If you hit someone out of bounds, you get penalized, because all play is supposed to stop when you step out of bounds. If you catch the ball out of bounds, it doesn't count. The game has to be played in bounds, and nothing counts out of bounds. You can set boundaries in your personal life. A personal boundary is a line that you set that defines what you'll allow and what you won't allow. It defines what you put up with and what you won't put up with. And the purpose for setting personal boundaries is to protect yourself from being manipulated, used, or abused by others. And I'll talk more about that in just a second. So there are all types of boundaries. But when it comes to interpersonal relationships, I want you to think of boundaries like this. It's a dividing line that you set to clearly define right from wrong, to clearly define what you deem to be acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior, to clearly define what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. In other words, it's a line that you don't want anyone to cross, whether it's you or anyone else. In fact, crossing the line is strictly prohibited and forbidden. So that's what I want you to think of when I talk about boundaries. Here's the line. This is right. This is wrong. This is acceptable behavior. This is unacceptable behavior. This is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I'm not comfortable with. This is what I'll put up with. This is what I won't put up with. Is everyone with me? Good. So let's talk about the purpose and the importance of setting boundaries within a marriage. In week 1, I gave you a very simple principle, and this is the principle. The more screwed up you are, the more screwed up your marriage will be. The less screwed up you are, the less screwed up your marriage will be. Insinuating that everyone is screwed up to some degree. And the reason I say insinuating is because I purposely use the words more and less. You need to understand that everyone is screwed up to some degree. It's just that some people are more screwed up than others. But that's also why everyone has problems in their marriage from time to time. It's because everyone is screwed up to some degree. But that's also why God doesn't fix marriages. God fixes people. You see, your marriage isn't broken, you are. So if you want to have a healthy marriage, then you have to become healthy. Now listen to me, because this is very important. Healthy people set personal boundaries. Let me say that again. Healthy people set personal boundaries. They set personal boundaries that clearly define right from wrong, that clearly define what they consider to be acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior, that clearly define what they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with. In other words, they draw a line that they don't want anyone to cross, including themselves. In fact, crossing that line is strictly prohibited and forbidden. And the reason they do that is to protect themselves from being manipulated, used, or abused by others, and to keep themselves from doing something that might bite themselves in the butt. Unhealthy people, on the other hand, they don't set personal boundaries. That's why they're easy to manipulate. If you're easy to manipulate, it's probably because you haven't set personal boundaries. It's also why these type of people allow others to take advantage of them and use them. And it's also why they allow people to abuse them. They don't have personal boundaries in their life that when someone crosses those boundaries, they scream, "No," or "Stop." No, they don't have that. And I'll give you some examples in just a little bit to illustrate what I'm talking about. But for now, let's keep going. In week 3, I told you that marriage was never intended to change who God created you to be. Instead, it was meant to enhance who God created you to be. The only problem is when we get married, it's only natural for our spouse to want to change us, and for us to want to change them. It's true. When we get married, the first thing we start doing is we try to change our spouse into the type of person we want them to be, and they start trying to change us into the type of person they want us to be. Listen, as much as we would like to believe that we only want our spouse's happiness, the truth is we do what we do in order to get what we want. And what we want is for our spouse to change into the type of person that we want them to be. So we use passive-aggressive behavior, subtle manipulation, and even emotional tactics to try and get our spouse to do what we want or to change into the type of person that we want them to be. It's just part of the Adamic nature. And they do the very same thing to us. And anyone who denies that is a liar. They're actually deceiving themselves. We all do it to some extent. But, and here's the but, the healthier we are, the less we do it. The unhealthier we are, the more we do it. Now, listen to me. If you marry someone who's not a Christian, or someone who is a Christian but they don't have the same level of commitment to Christ that you do, the type of person they want you to be is not the type of person God wants you to be. And I can promise you they are going to try and change you into something less than what God intends you to be. They're going to want you to compromise your values. They're going to want you to do things you're uncomfortable with. They're going to want you to participate in things that you feel are unacceptable, because that's what spouses do, especially spouses that aren't Christians or that don't have the same level of commitment that you do. Listen to me. As much as you'd like to believe that your spouse only wants your happiness, the truth is they're going to do whatever they have to get what they want. And what they want is for you to change into the type of person they want you to be. So they're going to use passive-aggressive behavior, subtle manipulation, and even emotional tactics to try and get you to do what they want or to change into the type of person they want you to be. That's why setting personal boundaries is so important. It's because everyone has the Adamic nature, and everyone is trying to manipulate others. Everyone is trying to influence others. Everyone is trying to get others to do things maybe they shouldn't do. Now, the healthier they are, the less they try to do that. The unhealthier they are, the more they try to do that. But we need to understand that everyone does that, including ourselves. And that's why we need to set boundaries. That's also why we need to let our boyfriend or our girlfriend know before we get married what our personal boundaries are and where we draw the line. This is what we'll do, and this is what we won't do. This is what we're comfortable with, and this is what we're not comfortable with. This is what we consider to be right. This is what we consider to be wrong. This is what we consider to be acceptable behavior, and this is unacceptable behavior. Now, let me give you an example of letting your boyfriend or your girlfriend know what your personal boundaries are. On your first date, unless you realize there's not going to be a second date, but on your first date or your second date, you need to let your date know right up front that there'll be no sex before marriage. And you tell them where you draw the line. Now, where do you draw the line? Well, you need to know that. That's what personal boundaries are. Parents, listen to me. The majority of kids that have sex, one of the reasons that they end up having sex is because they were pressured into doing something they weren't yet ready to say no to. And they didn't know how to say no. It happened before they actually knew what was taking place. Their boyfriend or their girlfriend was crossing lines they shouldn't have been crossed, but they didn't know what to do or how to do it. Why? Because you as parents have not prepared them to set personal boundaries and how to express those personal boundaries to others. Your child should never date if they don't have personal boundaries and they don't know where those boundaries are, and if they're not ready to be able to express that. Now listen to me, young people. You're probably thinking, well, if I said that, then no one would date me. Well, that might be a good thing. But I promise you, someone will date you, and the person who will date you is the type of person that has the same personal boundaries as you. You don't want to date people who have different personal boundaries, because I promise you, they're going to exert all the pressure they can to try and get you to move your boundaries to the place where their boundaries are set. Now, after you're married, you need to remind your spouse what your personal boundaries are and where you draw the line. This is what you'll do, and this is what you won't do. This is what you're comfortable with. This is what you're not comfortable with. This is what you consider to be right. This is what you consider to be wrong. This is what you consider to be acceptable behavior, and this is unacceptable behavior. You need to let your spouse know. I still expect you to come to church with me on Sunday mornings. I expect you, husbands, fathers, to be the spiritual leaders of the home. You went to church with me before we got married. I still expect you to go to church with me now. We don't use the word divorce around this house. Doesn't matter how angry you get, the word divorce is off limits. When we fight, there's no yelling, there's no screaming, there's no slamming of doors. We don't cuss at each other, we don't throw things, and we definitely don't hit. That's strictly off limits. Those are the personal boundaries that you need to have. If you don't have those personal boundaries, you're a very, very unhealthy person, and you need to understand that. So, that explains the purpose for setting boundaries within a marriage and why it's important. Now, let's talk about the type of boundaries you need to set. There are 3 different types of boundaries: personal boundaries, relationship boundaries, and protective boundaries. And we're going to start with the first, which is personal boundaries. As I said earlier, a personal boundary is a line that we set that clearly defines right from wrong. It clearly defines what we'll allow and what we won't allow. It defines what we'll put up with and what we won't put up with. It defines what we consider to be acceptable behavior and unacceptable behavior. And stepping over that line is strictly prohibited. Now, normally we set boundaries in the form of rules. This is a rule. We don't use the word divorce. We don't throw things. We don't cuss. People, those are personal boundaries. So normally we express them in the form of rules. But those are the things that we need to do. Now, what's great about having personal boundaries is that it predefines what I'll put up with and what I won't put up with. Let me say that again. Personal boundaries predefine what I'll put up with and what I won't put up with. And it keeps me from getting into situations that I'm not comfortable with. Let me give you an example. Most of you don't know this, but I was actually an associate pastor at another church before I started Cornerstone Fellowship. And I was there for about 2 years. And after I'd been there for a little over 6 months, the senior pastor started doing some very bizarre things. And he really got weird. And I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to get into why I left or how I left. But anyways, he started doing things that was on the borderline of being what I consider to be unethical. And people started leaving the church. And this went on for about a year. And about 2 weeks before I left, I was praying and the Holy Spirit spoke to me. And he said, "You're going to be leaving this church, but don't worry about it. You'll know exactly when." And that's exactly what happened. About 2 weeks after the Holy Spirit spoke to me and told me that, the pastor asked me to do something that was unethical. And he gave me an ultimatum. I either did what he asked me to do, or I needed to resign. Well, people, it was a no-brainer for me. So I wrote out my resignation, and I thanked him for the opportunity of working for him and at that church, and I turned it in. Well, when I turned it in, he started fudging, acting like it really wasn't an ultimatum and I could still work there, but it didn't matter. Because I couldn't work for someone, especially in the ministry, that would ask me to do something that was unethical. So I left the church. Now, people, it was never a question for me as to what I do. Because I had personal boundaries that clearly defined where the line was and what I would do if someone crossed that line. And because of my personal boundaries, this senior pastor could not manipulate me into doing something unethical by holding my job over my head. My personal boundaries clearly defined where the line was and what I would put up with and what I wouldn't. This is the line. This is right. This is wrong. This is acceptable. This is unacceptable. This is what I'm comfortable with. This is what I'm not comfortable with. And I am not going to work at a place that wants me to do something that I consider to be wrong. It's the same way here at Cornerstone Fellowship. Yes, I'm the senior pastor. Even though I'm in authority, I'm underneath authority. We have a board. But if the board ever asked me to do something that was unethical, I would tell them, no, I won't do that. Everything that we do and try to do is above board. Everything that we do, we want to be transparent. Why? Because things that are not transparent usually are things that shouldn't be going on. And I will not work at a place that asks me to do anything that is unethical. Now listen to me. When it comes to marriage, I don't participate in activities that I feel are sinful or that I'm uncomfortable with. And I don't try to manipulate my wife into participating in activities that she feels are sinful or that she's uncomfortable with. We don't go to movies with nudity in it. Let me try and give you that look. Let me explain something. Movies with nudity in it has pornography in it. It might be a little bit of pornography, but it's still pornography. If it has a lot of nudity in it, then it has a lot of pornography in it. But here's what you need to understand, and if you're taking notes, you write this down. Man is an incremental creature. Let me say that again. Man is an incremental creature. We are created to be that way. The Adamic nature has made us even more that way. Let me explain what I mean by incremental nature. We do things in increments. This is how our conscience becomes seared. The first time we do something that we think is wrong, we feel so bad about it. Oh, God, forgive me. I feel so guilty. God, I'll never do that again. The second time we do it, we feel guilty, but not as guilty. God, please forgive me. I know I shouldn't have done that. The third time we do it, yeah, we're guilty. God, forgive me about it. The next time we do it, it's like, well, yeah, it's wrong. The next time we do it, well, it's not that bad. And before we know it, that's what we're doing all the time. First time you had premarital sex, that was wrong. Oh, God, forgive me. Next time you had it, well, it was wrong, but. And slowly, that boundary keeps getting moved. That's why the Bible says that it's wrong to reset ancient boundaries. That's not just talking about property or land. That's talking about personal boundaries. God has set up boundary lines. This is the line that you don't cross. This is right. This is wrong. This is acceptable. This is unacceptable. But you see, when we slowly start doing things, before long, we no longer feel guilty about it. Now, sex before marriage, that's just what everyone does. And that's how you feel about it because you are an incremental creature. Calvinists believe that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh because that's what the Bible says. But they believe that he just immediately came and did that. Now, the way that God did that is that when he started bringing the plagues, he started with something small. It didn't mean that he created Pharaoh to be this way. It's just that he knows man. Man's an incremental creature. So he started with the plagues that were small. And when this plague happened, the Pharaoh said, my magicians can do that. And the first 3 or 4, they could do that. Then after this, their magicians couldn't do it. But each time he would go, I'm still not going to do that. And he had to bring him all the way to the point where every one of the firstborn children died in Egypt. And even then, he got mad and decided to follow the Israelites. But the way that God hardened his heart was through incremental moves. People, we are incremental creatures. When you set that boundary line, it needs to stay fixed. And the Bible says it's wrong to move ancient boundaries. And that's what it's referring to. So, that's the first type of boundary that you need to set, personal boundaries. Now let's talk about the second type, which is relationship boundaries. Relationship boundaries protect you from the world and from others. These type of boundaries dictate how you're going to let people treat you. In other words, what are you willing to put up with and what are you not willing to put up with? I'll give you an example to illustrate what I'm talking about. Years ago, I was sitting around talking to 2 men who were about my age. They were married just like I was, and we got to talking about fighting with our wives. Women, you're not the only ones that complain about your spouse. Men will do the same thing. And so I was talking with these 2 men, and we got on the subject of fighting with our spouse. And one of them said when his wife got really angry, she would punch him. And the other guy's eyes got real big, and he said, my wife does the same thing. And then they got to talking about who they thought could hit the hardest, his wife or the other person's wife. And, I'm just shocked. And they turn and they look at me, and they can see this shocked look on my face. And so they asked this. They said, has Lisa never hit you? And this is what I told them. I'll never forget it. I said, Lisa has never hit me, and Lisa will never hit me, because I refuse to be in a relationship in which there is any type of domestic abuse. Any type. Whether it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, or mental abuse. I refuse to be in any type of relationship in which there's any type of domestic abuse. Period. Now, let me give you another example. I refuse to take a cussing. Not cursing. We're in Cherokee County. I refuse to take a cussing. Why? Because that's verbal abuse. When I worked for Southwestern Bell, one day I got an order to put in a phone at a certain business. What I didn't know is that they'd screwed up this person's order, and they'd been waiting weeks to get a phone. Now, back then, there was no such thing as cell phones. I know that's hard to believe, young people, but there wasn't. And most people didn't even have a touch tone. It was one of those things that you went, so anyways, I was supposed to put this phone in, but he was supposed to have had it put in 2 weeks ago. And when he'd called the office to complain about it, someone had been rude to him. Well, when I finally showed up to put the phone in, let me tell you, he was livid. And here is this real live person. Because even back then, to get a phone put in, when they took away the office down here, you had to call Tulsa to be able to get that. So here I was, the first real live person he got to talk to. And the very first thing he did was he started cussing me. I had my tools in my hands. I'd already had them. I'd walking toward the office, came in the door, had my tools there, and man, he just let loose. And after about a minute and a half of it, I held up my hands. I said, wait a minute. I said, I get paid to put telephones in. I don't get paid to take a cussing. I'll tell you what. If you'll show me where you want this phone, I'll put this phone in, and I'll make sure that you're happy before I leave. I'll do everything possible to make sure you're happy. I'll see if I can get you some free phone service for a month or two or whatever. But if you'll let me, I'll put this phone in. Well, that just made him madder for some reason. I don't know why. And off he went. He started cussing me. So I picked up my tools. I opened the door. I walked out to my truck. I put the tools in my truck. I got in the driver's seat, and he said, where are you going? I said, I told you. I get paid to put telephones in. I don't get paid to take a cussing. I didn't say a word. I just took off. 15 minutes later, my boss called me. He said, what happened? I got to watch it. I'm so bad about giving names. My wife says, make sure you don't give any names when you tell the stories. But anyways, so my boss says, what happened to so-and-so? And I explained the situation. He said, well, would you mind going back there? I think I've got him calmed down. I said, not a problem. I said, I'll go back there and put the phone in. Don't have a problem with that. So I turn around, I get out. As soon as I get out, I see this look on his face, and man, he's gloating. And immediately he starts in cussing me. I've got my tools in my hand. I set them down. I said, excuse me, sir. So I'm going to tell you one more time. I get paid to put telephones in. I don't get paid to take a cussing. I will put the phone in where you want it, and I'll make sure you're happy before I leave. But I'm not going to take a cussing. I'll be polite to you if you're polite to me. That just infuriated him. Man, off he went, sticking this finger in my face. So just calmly, I pick up my tools. I walk over to my truck. I put them in. I get in the driver's seat, and I take off. Yeah. He's got this shocked look on his face. 15 minutes later, the boss called me. Said, what happened? So I told him exactly what happened. He said, well, would you mind going back out there? I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I said, if you want me to go out there, I said, call my union rep. We'll have a meeting, but I'm not going back out there. I said, David, let me tell you something. That's my boss. It's okay to say this. David Arbuckle, all right? Sorry. You don't know who the business owner is, and I'm not going to tell you. Lord, please help me. He's dead now, but his son's not. Everyone's going. Said, call my union rep up. We'll have a little meeting. Said, never mind. Sends John Beasley out there. At the end of the day, John Beasley comes and says, I don't know what happened, but let me tell you, when I went out there, all he did was point to where he wanted the phone. He didn't say one word. Listen to me. I refuse to take a cussing. That's verbal abuse. I have hung up on family members. And when they called back, I explained to them, I don't take a cussing. I did as a child because I had no choice. But when I became an adult, that was a relationship boundary that I set. I don't cuss people, and I don't take a cussing. And if they started cussing again, I hung up on them. Why? Because people, I don't take any form of abuse. I refuse to be in a situation where I'm going to be abused. And God doesn't expect me to take abuse. God does not expect you to take abuse. And if you do, well, we'll get to that in a second. In fact, let me give you a principle. If you're taking notes, I want you to write this down because some of you need to hear this. This is a very important principle. You are partially to blame for how you're treated. Let me say that again. You are partially to blame for how you are treated. In fact, this may be hard to hear, but it's true. If your spouse continually mistreats you, you have to take partial responsibility for it because you put up with it. That's right. You have to accept partial responsibility because you put up with it. The truth is, as long as you put up with it, it's going to continue. And man is an incremental creature. So it's only going to get worse over time. If you date someone, when they get mad, they look like they're going to become physically abusive, but they never have been physically abusive. Let me tell you, you end it immediately. Because man is an incremental creature. And even though they're only going up to this point, eventually they will go to this point, and they'll go to this point. This is why relationship boundaries are so important. Listen to me. If you have a great marriage, then you have to take responsibility. Or I should say, if you want a great marriage, then you have to take responsibility for the way you behave towards your spouse. But you also have to take responsibility for the behavior you accept from your spouse. I and Lisa do not tolerate any type of abuse. Never have, never will. And we raised our children. We have told them, you do not have to accept any type of abuse, whether it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, or mental abuse. God does not expect that to take place. Now, this takes us to the third type of boundary that I want to talk about, which is called protective boundaries. These type of boundaries nurture and protect the relationships that are closest to you. Protective boundaries are an extension of your personal boundaries. They include the boundaries that you create to protect your marriage and the boundaries you create to protect your children. In fact, let me give you an example to illustrate what I'm talking about. I do not meet with members of the opposite sex without Lisa being present. I just don't do it. It's a rule. Rules are boundaries. So if a person comes up to me that's a female and says, Pastor, I'd like to have a private consultation with you or a private meeting with you, I would say, well, I'm sorry, you need to set up a meeting with my wife. First, you meet with my wife if you're a female. If she can't handle the situation, she'll tell me and she'll set up a meeting with both of us in there. But I never meet with someone of the opposite sex alone. I just don't do it. And people, I'll be honest with you, I really don't care what you think. So it doesn't do any good to email me about this. And I can promise you this, the scriptures you use, you're twisting and perverting. Don't play that game with me because I can beat you at it. All right? But the reason I have that rule is because that's a protective boundary designed to protect my marriage. That keeps me from being falsely accused, and it keeps me from developing inappropriate feelings for someone other than my wife. This rule not only applies to me, this rule applies to everyone on my staff. Now, whether or not people on my staff obey it is up to them. But I have a rule for everyone on my staff, and I have for the last 30 years. You do not meet with anyone of the opposite sex without someone else being present. You don't do that. Because the chances of something happening are always there. And I am not responsible if one of my staff members has a moral failure. The reason they had a moral failure is because they broke the rule. They did not accept the personal boundary, and they did not abide by it. And as a result of that, they developed feelings for someone other than their spouse, and it's no one's fault but their own. That's good teaching, Pastor Allen. Mike Pence was totally right when he said he does not go out to eat with, he doesn't meet with someone of the opposite sex without his wife being present. Thank God we have a godly person in that position, because that is right. Example number 2. I didn't let my kids stay with anyone who allowed people with addictions to come over or to come around. And that caused some hurt feelings from time to time. But that's too bad. My kids are more valuable to me than anyone else, including my parents. Let me say something to you. Not all family is the same. And when you're a child and you're under the authority of your parents, your obligation is to obey them. And the reason it's your obligation to obey them is because as long as you're underneath their roof, you're underneath their rules. That's biblical. You're not owed enough and you're not responsible enough to take care of yourself. And until you're responsible enough and owed enough to do that, then you will abide by their rules. But when you leave the house and you get married, you need to understand something. You no longer are required to obey your parents. You're to honor your parents. And honor and obedience are not the same thing. And then I want you to understand something. Not all family relationships are the same. The Bible tells a man that he's to leave his father and mother, cleave unto his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. They start their own individual family unit. At that point, their children are more important than their parents. The Bible teaches that. So, when my kids were little, I didn't let them stay with anyone who allowed people with addictions to come around. And that caused some hurt feelings from time to time. But that's too bad, because my kids are more valuable to me than anyone else. So if it hurt their feelings, that was too bad. Your children are underneath your protective custody. You're responsible for them. And if you do not have boundaries, something is wrong with you as a parent. You are their guardian. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people who've sat in my office crying about their kids being molested. And yet the stories they told me, and I thought, and you let them stay with these people? What is wrong with you? They're called protective boundaries for a reason. I am blown away. And what people will allow and won't allow, but it all comes back to this simple word called boundaries. Now, this type of boundary also dictates when to cut a person off, because sometimes that's necessary. You see, there are times when you have to cut a relationship loose because it's toxic. In other words, to protect yourself and your family, you have to cut a person loose. And sometimes the person you have to cut loose is a family member. And I'm going to be honest with you, 99% of the time it's a family member. Only 1% of the time is it a friend. 99% of the time it's a family member. Now let me tell you a story that illustrates when you need to cut someone loose. A man was out walking one day, and as he approached a bridge that was suspended hundreds of feet over this deep gorge, he saw another man walking towards him, a stranger. This stranger had a rope in his hands, and he saw him stop on the bridge, and then he tied the rope around his waist. And he made sure the knot was really good. Well, he kept walking, and finally he came to where the stranger was. And when he got to him, he was asked by the stranger if he would please hold the end of the rope. Surprised by the request, he grabbed the rope without thinking and said, "Sure." The man said, "Hold it tight with both hands. Don't let go." And before he knew it, he climbed over the rail and he jumped off the bridge. Well, it almost jerked the man off of the bridge when the stranger's fall hit the end of the rope. But he held on and quickly braced himself. "What are you trying to do?" the man yelled. "Just hold tight," the stranger said. "My life is in your hands." Well, this is ridiculous, the man thought. So he tried to pull the man up. But he found out he couldn't do it. He wasn't strong enough. So he yelled at the stranger to help him. He yelled at the stranger to try and climb up the rope. But the stranger refused. Instead, he kept saying, "Don't let go. My life is in your hands." Well, this went on for almost an hour. He'd beg the stranger to try and climb up the rope, but the man would refuse, telling him, "Don't let go. My life is in your hands." Well, finally, the man said, "I want you to listen very carefully because I mean what I'm about to tell you. I cannot accept responsibility for whether you live or die any longer. The choice of whether you live or die is yours, not mine." "You can't mean what you say," the stranger screamed. "I am your responsibility. My life is in your hands." The man waited for a few minutes. 1 minute went by, 2 minutes went by, 3 minutes went by, and then he realized there were no tugs of tension on the rope. In other words, the man was making no effort whatsoever to try and climb up the rope. So he yelled to the stranger, "I accept your choice." And he cut the man loose. Did he do the right thing? Well, of course he did. Because the stranger took no responsibility for his own life. Instead, he put all of the responsibility on someone else. And yet he chose to put himself in the predicament he was in. And still he did nothing to try and get himself out of it. Now let me show you something interesting. Turn with me, if you would, to the book of Galatians chapter 6. We're going to read verse number 2, and then we're going to jump down and we're going to read verse number 5. Here's Galatians chapter 6, verse number 2. "Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ." Now jump down to verse 5. This is verse 5. "For every man shall bear his own burden." Is this an antithetical proverb, like in the book of Proverbs, where you say one thing, then you say something else, and they contradict each other, and the meaning is somewhere in the middle? You know, you have that in the book of Proverbs. "Answer a fool, lest he's wise in his own conceit. Don't answer a fool, blah, 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 blah." Well, what do? Do you answer a fool or you don't answer a fool? Well, doesn't matter, because he's a fool. Won't matter what you do. Seriously, that's what it means. Yeah. Is this an antithetical proverb? No, not at all. You see, the word burden occurs twice here, once in verse 2 and once in verse 5. But the word burden in verse 2 is different than the word burden in verse number 5. In verse number 2, the word burden is translated from the Greek word baros, and it means burden or heavy weight. So what this is saying is that when we see someone trying to carry a heavy weight by themselves, we're to help them carry it. That's the law of Christ. We help people in their time of need. The only problem is, some people expect others to carry the weight for them and not just help them. And that's not what God meant by this. People, that's not the law of Christ. That's why he added verse number 5. Look at verse 5 again. "For every man shall bear his own burden." Now, the word burden in verse number 5 is the Greek word fordion, which means responsibilities. So what I want you to do is I want you to cross out the word burden in verse number 5, and I want you to replace it with the word responsibilities. Now, notice what verse 5 is saying. "For every man shall bear his own responsibilities." Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're supposed to fulfill your own responsibilities and not expect others to do it for you. And you are responsible for the choices that you make. Others are not responsible for the choices you make. And if you're not willing to take responsibility for the choices you make and try to help yourself, then others have every right to cut you off. And they should, according to the Bible. Seriously. Turn to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10, and I'll prove it to you. Notice what this says. For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule. Now remember, boundaries are normally expressed in the form of rules. But this is a rule. You don't break the rules. What's the rule? For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule. The one who was unwilling to work shall not eat. In other words, don't feed them. Let me explain something. We all have family members. Maybe they're close family members, maybe they're extended family members, but we have family members that have made poor choices. But here's the sad part. They're a problem child because the common characteristic of a problem child is they never accept responsibility for their actions. It's never their fault. If they're on drugs, it's not their fault. If they're an alcoholic, it's not their fault. It's always someone else's fault. They weren't loved as a child, or they weren't this, or they weren't that, or my wife left me. Honey, your wife might have left you, but you're still responsible for the choices you make. Yeah, it's true. So sometimes we have to cut people off. This is the thing about protective boundaries. Protective boundaries come in and you set these boundaries. You make these rules up. This is what you will do, and this is what you won't do. This is what you'll do to protect your marriage. This is what you'll do to protect your kids. I won't allow my kids to be put in situations where they're in danger. I'm not going to do that. Why? Because they're more valuable to me than anyone else. And God expects me to protect them. They need my protection. So, 3 boundaries that we need to make. If you want to be healthy, if you want to have healthy relationships, then you have to set boundaries. And these are the 3 types of boundaries you have to set. Personal boundaries, relationship boundaries, protective boundaries. And I promise you, if you set boundaries, your life will be so much better. Because once you set boundaries in your marriage, once you tell your spouse, or even before you get married, this is part of your promises. I promise I'm never going to scream at you. I'm never going to yell at you. I'm never going to get so mad that I knock a hole in the sheetrock. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to cheat on you. I'm not going to verbally abuse you. I'm not going to mentally abuse you. I'm not going to physically abuse you. That's a rule. That's a line. That's something I'm not going to cross. That's a boundary. And then you let them know, I expect the same thing from you. And that's what creates a healthy relationship. And then you go far further. You teach your children that. You teach your children, if you're on a date and this is the way your date acts, this is what they do. If they want to move the ancient boundaries, if they want to move your rules, this is where your personal boundary is, but they want to try and talk you into moving it here, they are not the type of person you want to be with. Because eventually, because you're an incremental creature, you will move your boundaries. Now, I'm a strong-willed person. But even I know I'm an incremental creature. Some of you are hooked on pornography, and I'll tell you why. Because you started with a little bit, felt guilty about it, hid it, hide it, do all the things that Adam and Eve did. Boy, that pull was strong. You came back, and now you don't think anything about it. You just hide it from everyone, but that's just something you do. Let me tell you why you're at this point. Your conscience is seared, and the reason it's seared is because you're an incremental creature. And once you start doing something, It won't be long before you're moving the boundaries. And now I guarantee you, you have a way that you can justify why you do it. That's the way man is.
There's a chair that's never moved, a cup that still remembers you. Sunlight spills across the floor, just like it did before. I kept your books upon the shelf, didn't change a thing myself. Every creak inside this home whispers softly, you're not alone. There's dust on dreams, but they still shine. I've been waiting. Take your time. The porch lights burning through the rain. I'll be here when you come home again. When you come home again, the world can rest its fight. Lay down your heavy heart. You've carried far too tight. No need for words to explain. I'll hold you when you come home again. The map of years is on your face. Every scar's a line of grace. You walked the miles I dreamed you would. Now come back home, it's understood. I'll cook the stew you used to crave. We'll laugh at all the time we saved. The kettle hums a sweet refrain of a love that never washed away. You don't owe me stories told. The road has made your spirit bold. Just sit in my love and breathe again. You're safe inside these hands. When you come home again, the night feels like a song. No matter where you've been, this heart's where you belong. The years may fade, the skies may rain, but I'll still wait when you come home again. So come on home, my child. The door's still open wide. You speak in shadow